I had a spiritually transformative experience and near-death-like experience in March of 2019, where my entire life transformed 180 degrees. I went from a drug addict, a prostitute, homeless, to this beautiful enlightened being that you see before you now. Not quite, but yeah, so my whole life just completely transformed from my spiritual experience. Inside of my spiritual experience, I was shown my pre-birth planning. I was shown that I had actually designed my life before I came to Earth, and that I'm a divine spiritual warrior. We all are. And we're here for this beautiful mission of the Great Awakening. And I went from 0 awareness to 100 awareness. I was an atheist. I didn't know anything about spirituality or anything bigger than myself. And today my life is vastly different. My addiction started when I was very young. I come from a family of addicts. My parents are addicts, their parents are addicts, and it's been that way for generations and generations. So, that had a lot to do with environment. I would watch my parents when I was young, and I endured a lot of trauma as a child as well. Abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and I was sexually abused as well as a child. So I really never wanted to feel like me because all of the things that were happening to me didn't feel good. And so I would watch my parents, and whenever they had an emotion, any kind of emotion, whether it was joy and elation or depression and sadness, if they drank something, or if they took a pill, or they smoked something, their whole attitude changed, their whole emotional body changed. And so I took mental notes as a small child. As soon as I can do that, I'm going to do that too, but I'm going to do it better than them. And that's what I tried to do. And so my addiction, it took off at a very young age, like preteen age. And in 2007, my parents, who were both struggling with their own addiction, they made this decision that they had to stop using drugs, that they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. They couldn't live this life anymore. And the only way that they knew to stop using drugs was to die, because that's what they had seen in our lives. They had seen people die from their addiction. And so in 2007, my parents committed suicide together. And I was 23 when that happened. My sister was 18. We found them. And it just enveloped me in this cloak of trauma and victimization. And so my addiction became my parent when my actual parents left Earth. And my addiction was so loud and so comforting. And it said, I'll never leave you. I'll never abandon you like they did. It's me and you together forever. And so my addiction became my guiding star. It became my everything. It came before every relationship, every marriage, every apartment, every job, every family relationship. Nothing was more important than my relationship with my addiction. And yeah, in the end, my spiritual experience happened from a drug overdose. So my addiction even brought me to a different state of reality. It really was my guiding star in my life. So I have some language for it today because I was never pronounced dead, and I don't think that I actually died. I think that I just took too many drugs. And, my drug-a-log for the day was at least 6 or 7 different substances. Psychedelics were involved. And so what I experienced was a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. And if you're unfamiliar with what that is, it's okay. So was I. Kundalini energy is described as life force energy. That's how it roughly translates. So I had this life force energy activation where every single one of my chakra systems became activated and online. And I didn't even know what the word chakra was, but I had this rush of energy going up and down me. And as my third eye and my crown chakra opened and activated, it felt like my spirit left my body through my head and started to travel into this space of eternity. And the first part of my experience was what I perceive was like a life review, because I started to experience every emotion that you could ever imagine on earth. I mean, from the pit, the depths of despair and anguish, all the way to unconditional love. And I realized that I was experiencing the events in my life, not only from my point of view, but from other people's point of view. And I caused a lot of harm. You know, we have a saying that hurt people and healed people heal people. Well, I was definitely hurt, and I was taking everybody down with me. And so I caused mountains and mountains of real tangible harm in people's lives. And so I started to experience how they felt when I was abusing them. And then I also felt my parents' suicide, not only from the perspective of a grieving daughter, but I also felt it from their perspective. And that pain that I experienced, I felt like I was drowning. It felt like every cell in my body was covered in concrete and static and spikes. And I thought, okay, I died and this is hell and this is where I am now. That's really what it felt like. And then I started to hear these very familiar masculine voices. And they were saying, you are worthy of all the love in the universe. You are worthy of all the love in the universe. And so I started to follow their voices. And one of the voices was the voice of my father. And another voice was my divine masculine energy. And also a boyfriend that I had that had recently passed away. He was there as well. And then it kind of morphed into every man that I had ever met. My husbands were there, my uncles, my cousins, like they all kind of morphed into this one energy. And this masculine energy was guiding me through the space of eternity. And when I landed in the light, it kind of felt like I landed on a deck of a spaceship. And it looked, we have this carnival ride here. It's called the Gravitron, and it looks like a spaceship, and it spins really fast so that there's no gravity inside, and you can throw yourself up against the wall. And it felt like I came out of the side of one of those walls, and I landed on this deck. And there was thousands of other souls, and they all just kind of looked like these light beings. Like they looked like human bodies, but they were nothing but light. And everybody was super pumped. Everybody was glowing really bright. And there was this commander in the center of this platform, and the commander was gearing us up for this mission to Earth. We were all getting ready to jump to Earth. And you can call that commander Christ or Krishna, Buddha, higher consciousness, the energy of something ascended, something in charge, something light and love. And I, like everybody was super geared up, and we were like, we're going to Earth. And that's when I was downloaded with this knowing that we're here for the ascension of Earth, for the transformation of consciousness. Again, none of these words are words that I had ever heard before, but I'm just like tucking them away. I'm like, okay, ascension, Earth, 5D. I had never heard any of this before. And then obviously after my experience, I found confirmation on the internet that this is a real thing, that other people have also that know this information. So everything was happening in my mind simultaneously, all at the exact same moment, but the way that my linear mind can compute it. Next, I transferred over to a scene where I was in front of this table of beings. And they never told me who they were, but they didn't have to, because they were definitely people in charge. And so I didn't even have to question it. And they were thumbing through this big, huge gold book. And they were turning the pages, and they were like, okay, nice to see you. You're not meant to stay. Get ready for your trip back. And I was looking around me. I'm like, you guys aren't talking to me, are you? Because I don't know where I am, but it feels way better than where I just was. And then things started to kind of click together for me. And I realized, oh, I'm home. And these are the people who are going to send me away again. And so I start throwing a tantrum, and like a small child. I could see myself kind of transform into a small child. And I was like, I will not go back. I said, you guys don't tell us what Earth is actually like. You don't prepare us at all. And there is no way that I am going back into that experience. And they were like, kind of laughing. And this is not in any kind of sinister way. They were like, you're there for 5 seconds. Like, this is nothing, because when I got there, it really felt like I woke up from a dream. And I was like, whoa, that was so weird. What a weird dream. And the only thing that I could remember out of 35 years of life at that point in time was that my parents had committed suicide. I couldn't grab not one other thing from 35 years of life. So when I sit around today and I worry about what I look like or what I'm eating or what's going on in the world, I didn't even remember any of that. None of that came into my perception at all. So in that space, they said, we're gonna tell you about your pre-birth plan so that you understand why Earth feels the way it does to you and how you're going to get through the second part of your life, because you're going back. And so they took me through my pre-birth planning, and it looked a lot like a video game to me. And it could be because of the generation that I'm born in, or because we're living in a simulation, whatever. You could take your pick. But the way that it looked in my mind's eye was that I was inside of a grocery store, and I had this big empty grocery cart. And the walls of the grocery store aisles were lined with these gigantic cereal boxes, and every cereal box had a life experience on it. And because I was coming to Earth for this divine mission of ascension, I was going to have to transmute a lot of trauma, not only for myself and the family line that I picked to be born into, but also for the collective itself. And so I took on very dense experiences that lots of people in the world experience, like, being molested as a child, the sexual trauma as a young adult and a teenager, having addicts for parents, that's very traumatizing, being an addict myself, poverty. I grew up very impoverished. We never had any money. Like homelessness is something that I experienced in my life, prostitution, just a lot of trauma, a lot of really dense experiences. And these are dense for me, like I could have picked to have been born in a country that doesn't have running water or electricity and people are dying of hunger all the time. But for me, this was the path that I chose. So like, might sound very traumatic to us watching something on the internet, but think about people who don't have the internet. Their lives are also traumatizing in their own right, but maybe they're actually better in some way as well. But this was the life that I had picked. So I start throwing everything in the grocery cart, and it's these crazy experiences. And then I had also thrown things in the grocery cart that I hadn't gotten to yet in my life, like overcoming, recovery, being a speaker, being an author. I see all of these experiences, but none of them had happened in my life yet. So it didn't resonate. It didn't make any sense. I was like, that's weird that that's in there. And then I found my awareness back in front of the table of beings. And so I had this deep understanding now. I had this very deep knowing inside of me, and it was like 2 tons of bondage had been released from my spirit because I was no longer a victim to my circumstance. I was actually the divine co-creator of my life. And that feeling of freedom was everything that I had been looking for my whole life, everything that I had been looking for inside of drugs, inside of men, inside of alcohol. What's going to make me feel okay about my life? And this was it, this belief, this knowing that I was downloaded with. And I was so grateful. And I told the table of beings, like, this is amazing. I'm so grateful to finally know the truth. This is what I've been waiting for my whole life. I'm still not going back to Earth, but I'm really happy to know this. And they were like, listen, this is not a punishment. You're not going back as a punishment. You're going back because you signed up for a mission. You are a divine spiritual warrior, and you've taken on a lot of very dense experiences because you can handle it. And I was just so dismissive. I really didn't want to come back. They told me that the first part of my life was like boot camp, and the second part of my life would actually be carrying out the mission. And it wouldn't be nearly as difficult because I would have help. Number one, I would be living in awareness. I would know all of these things. And then I would have helpers. I would have mentors and soulmates and teachers and communities that would help me along the way. And they just kept saying, trust us, trust us. And I was like, I do not trust you guys. And then I found my awareness kind of like sifting back into my body. And they had given me a choice that if I didn't want to go back into this physical body that I had just come from, that I could be born into another body. And so they showed me the baby that I would be born into. And she was going to have to do everything that I had already done. And she even had deeper levels of societal adversity because of the family line that she had to be born into. And so I was like, no way, man, I can't start from zero. I was like, let's just go see what happens. And I came back into my body. And that was the bulk. I mean, that is the experience. There's so much more, but that's the part that's like, can be comprehended, I think. And yeah, like the freedom from the experience. But when I came back from my experience, I just thought that it was drug-induced psychosis. I was like, that was so crazy. I was so messed up. I'll never be that high ever again. And so I just wrote the whole thing off, and I just continued to live my life the way that I was living it, using drugs, using people, being in depravity and degradation on a daily basis. And so, yeah, that was my experience.
That's a lot. So, okay, so you carried on. So what then caused the shift? What made you realize that that wasn't a psychosis? Something must have
Yeah,
happened.
all of these, weird coincidences. Now I call them synchronicities, but all of these things were happening in my life that were just too bizarre to write off as some sort of coincidence. And the information that I needed started to find its way to me. I had my laptop open, and there was nothing on. There was no internet browser up, nothing. And then all of a sudden YouTube popped up and a video started playing all on its own. And it was a Dolores Cannon video. And I swear, every thought that I was having as she was talking, it was like she was answering me. And I was like, this is crazy. This is crazy. There's a woman in the computer. She's talking to me right now. So again, I still think that I'm in psychosis because I'm like, how could this be happening? And then all of my drug dealers, they all stopped selling drugs on the exact same day. I'm talking about people that did not know each other. These are 10 separate men from 10 different parts of New York City, and they all decided in the exact same day that they were out of the game. So then I had no way to get what I needed. And it was just too obvious to me that something was going on. I also had this very stern internal guidance going on. It wasn't loud. It was just like very authoritative. And it was like, it just kept saying, it's time to do something different. Give up, surrender. And I was just so absolutely adamant that I would not change my life. And then I was in heroin withdrawal. I had an addiction to opiates along with a million other addictions to other substances. But, I had a physical dependency to this one particular drug. And I was on my bed. I was writhing in pain, so sick. I mean, sicker than I had ever been in my 20 plus years of using opiates. And I had this thought, and it was like a mental or spiritual suicide in this moment. And I thought, I know exactly what my parents were going through because I'm right there. This is it. But I was so sick that I couldn't even get up out of bed and figure out a way to kill myself. I couldn't even go to the kitchen and grab a knife or, try to take 100 pills or something. I was that sick. And I heard this voice and it told me to lay down and to count backwards from 10. And so I was in the throes of desperation. I was like, okay, strange voice, whatever you say, please help me. Please make this stop. And I experienced a spontaneous healing. In my mind's eye, as I laid back and I counted down, I saw these two little men. Every time I tell the story, I see them again, and they're just sitting there waving. But I see these two little men appear in my mind's eye, and they have these bulbous noses. They're wearing these white lab coats, and these little lawnmowers manifest in front of them. And they're kind of bouncing up and down because of the engine of the lawnmower. And they start walking through the crevices of my mind, and they're going through every inch of my mind. And as they do, I feel these intense hot tingles start to take over my head. And I just knew that something was happening. Something divine was happening. And when they were finished mapping out my mind, there was this bright white flash, and it felt like somebody had drawn X's on my forehead. And in that moment, I was instantaneously healed out of day 3 of heroin withdrawal. Moments before, I was sick all over myself, welcoming death, writhing in pain. It feels like in heroin withdrawal, it feels like your bones are on fire and your skin is made of broken glass. And it's so agonizing because there's nothing actually physically wrong with you, but that's what it feels like. It feels like everything is wrong with you. And then all of a sudden I was completely well and fine and healed. And I knew that it was a miracle. And so, I threw myself out of bed. I threw myself on the floor on my knees. I start praying. I don't know what I'm doing. I've never prayed before. And I just start calling out to the divine. And I say, how could this be happening to me? You could not have picked a more unworthy subject. I don't believe in this. I don't believe in you. Why is this happening? For the contrast of my life, because it's very contrasted. Before my healing and my spiritual experience, I was a drug addict. I was an orphan to suicide. I was a prostitute. I was a liar, a manipulator, a thief. I was a rapist. I was a racist. I was an abuser. Just the bottom of the barrel kind of human being. And here I was, completely loved, covered in grace and healing. And you just could not have picked a more unworthy person, you know? So for me, a big part of my experience also is that there's no such thing as condemnation. I lived my life the exact opposite of the way that you'd think that you'd need to have God love you. And God loves me anyway. And so after my experience, I thought, well, number one, I thought that I could go out and heal people. I was like, Jesus loves me and he's given me the gift. So like, now I'm going out. And I went out onto the New York City subway system and I was proselytizing and evangelizing. I was like a homeless crackhead. So I looked crazy. And I was laying hands on homeless people and I was telling them that I could heal them with just my touch. It was very chaotic and insane. And then as the dust started to settle, you know, I found my way into a long-term treatment facility, a drug rehabilitation center. And that's where I stayed there for 1.5 years. And I integrated my spiritual experience, even though I didn't know that's what it was. I just needed to be somewhere safe. And I also needed to figure out how to live life and not use drugs. And so that's what I did. I spent 1.5 years there with this insatiable thirst for knowledge. I read every sacred text. I read everything I could get my hands on about metaphysics and the law of attraction. And I began to manifest my reality. And I did so much healing in that space, so much healing. And it was like, you know, on the fast track of healing that I felt every emotion I had ever felt in my whole life. They all flooded in me. And I felt the grief from my parents, the loss of my parents for the first time with a clear mind. You know, they had been dead 11 years when my spiritual experience happened. And I had never really felt the grief because I had been medicating and sedating myself the entire time. So in that treatment facility, I finally felt the tidal wave, the tsunami of grief. And thank God I was somewhere safe, like in an institution, because I wasn't able to go out and drink or use drugs behind those really intense feelings.
So what happened with all your friends, or did you not have friends in between?
I don't know. People didn't want to be around me. I was an animal. I mean, you look at me now and you would never know who I was before because I don't even look the same now. Like something lit up. My spirit came alive for the first time. It was asleep. It was unawakened. It was not activated. And then in the moment of my awakening, I finally became filled with light and joy and spirit. But, you know, at the end of the road with my addiction, I had burned every bridge. I had lost every connection. And the only friends that I had were people that I did drugs with. I know I have some family members in my life. My cousin, she's my best friend. She's like my sister. And she's been with me through all of it. And she sees the shift in my life. And it was so strange because when I came into spiritual awareness, she started talking about the same things. You know, I would say, what do you think about angels or this and that? And she's like, oh my God, I've been reading about all that stuff too. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. You know, like my inner shift is affecting my outer world. And that's not to say, you know, my actual sister, she has, just because I had some kind of experience or I'm in recovery now doesn't mean that she has openness and forgiveness in her heart for all the harm that I caused throughout our lives. So, you know, like the healing process is not linear and it comes in layers. And so I just take what I can get. I can't do anything about the harm that I caused before. There's nothing that I can do about it. All I can do is be a better person moving forward. And like I shared from my experience, there's no condemnation. So I could have continued living my life the way that I was, and I would still make it back to heaven. Everybody does, because that's who we truly are. We are unconditional love at our core. But today I choose to live my life aligned with spiritual principles. Number one, because it feels better. It feels a lot better. Like the way that I live my life today, this is the high that I was always looking for. Being of service to other people, being of service to humanity, that feels like the most intense chemical high that I could ever imagine. So today I choose to live my life in a righteous way because it feels better and it feels more aligned. And, you know, the universe definitely wants me to.